universe, the creation of mankind, the creation of the natural life, animal life, vegetable life, everything around us, basically, God says, I did this, and I did it for you. And I would offer, as we start this kind of discussion this morning, 2 or 3 quick observations. Look at chapter 1, and look again at verses 26 through the end of the chapter. God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life. I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that He made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the 6th day. Please appreciate that there are several things of significance that span the ages. As long as temporal time exists, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? Temporal time. As long as the temporality rules this universe, man having dominion is significant. Honestly, in an evolutionary setting, man would not have dominion, okay? The T-Rexes would have already eaten us all up, okay? And you just think in terms of practicality, why is it that man has dominion? Well, because God assigned us that. Why is it that we are male and female, in spite of what the gender-confused world around us says? Well, because God made us that way. Why is it that mankind tends to multiply? Because God commanded that. Why is the world the way that it is? Well, these universal principles of dominion and generation being succeeded by each generation, and male and female, all of these things are the result of God's blessing upon man and God's assignment to man. As you go to chapter 2, you have the same thing in regards to marriage and the family unit. And then you get to chapter 3, which is kind of the crux of the rest of the Bible. We messed that all up. This is what the Bible is about. We started this class by making the observation, the Bible is history with a purpose. And the purpose is God made us in His image. We messed that up by sinning. We lost fellowship. We are the victims of curses as a result of sin, and God's fixing that. And that's what the rest of the Bible is about, okay? And so Genesis in a nutshell is God made us, we messed up, God's in the process of fixing it. And in doing so, He's revealing Himself because His system for fixing it ultimately is going to demand faith in God. Okay, God's outside of time, and this is a hard concept because we live within boundaries. God has no boundaries. If this is the universe and time and everything in it, God's looking at it from the outside. So what happens here in time and what happens here 3,000 years later, because God's not bound by time, He can see all that at once. And He can see where this is all going. And so He's starting it over here, knowing that when you get over here, you're going to have faith in God, and this is the way I'm going to make that possible. And that's where Genesis starts. Here is God. I made you, you messed up, you lost your shot, but I'm going to fix it. And so He's going to start with Israel. Okay? So, that's the beginning of the book. Now, if we don't have any participation, I've got stuff to say for the rest of the class. But what I asked you Wednesday was, what do you get from this? What have you learned from faith? What do you see maybe that you hadn't seen going back through Genesis for maybe the 20th time for some of us? What's here that helps you? So, I'm going to open the floor, and if we don't get any discussion, I'll close it again. Dennis, I saw your hand first.
I saw the greater the love of God, the patience of God, even more so with the nations. And it made me appreciate where we're at today. There's many other things. That's the one thing that I thought of.
Okay, if you couldn't hear Dennis, he said, what I saw was the greater love of God, especially in His patience in dealing with people and with the nations, and it's offered me perspective about where we are today. Phyllis, I saw your hand.
Well, first of all, Genesis spans over 2,000 years. I mean, it's hard to understand that. When you look at it, you think it's just the succession, but it took 2,000 years.
Probably even more. Yeah.
And also, God's unimaginable power is seen in Genesis as nowhere else in the Bible.
Okay.
As opposed, that's the power, as opposed to the New Testament where it shows unimaginable love.
Okay.
Because of Christ's death and His life and stuff. We can contrast the two.
Okay. Everybody hear that? Phyllis's remark was Genesis shows the unimaginable power of God in a way that it's not revealed elsewhere in the Scripture. And so I saw another hand over here. Curtis?
Yeah, as you were reading through the Bible, I kept noticing how often you would say, the Lord said it, the Lord spoke. You just have to drop it open to chapter 31, says, the Lord said to Jacob. And then you see those very same people turning right around in the present day.
Yeah.
And that's whispered to me. It seemed like if God appeared to me or spoke to me, why be on the straight and narrow path? So I guess it just reinforces what we know, that they were just ordinary people.
Yeah. Curtis said it strikes him that how many times God appears to or speaks to His people in the Scriptures, and yet they defy Him or they turn away from Him or they lack faith in Him. And I guess all of us are kind of that way. If God spoke to me, that would make an impact on me. But it doesn't always make an impact on them. And let me add this comment, because this is one of the things that I would note. One of the things you see in Genesis is, and you really see it in the first 11 chapters, is the stubbornness of man and his propensity to fail, to sin over and over. I say stubbornness, I should say selfishness. Because that's what we struggle with, folks. We all struggle with it. Some people are better than others, but we all struggle with selfishness. And it manifests itself in a bunch of different ways in our lives. You see it from the beginning in Genesis. When we have free will and we have a mind inside of a body and we feel things and we think things and we have the capacity to think for ourselves, what we don't do very well is to think outside ourselves. That is really, to me, the challenge of discipleship. It is what Jesus did better than any man has ever done. And I would propose that every failure that man has ever sustained personally, nationally, corporately, is because of selfishness to some degree or another. So, yes, that's exactly right. There are a lot of contrasts. We think about the faith of Abraham, the faith of Isaac, but then you see these constant, God's making it so obvious, and yet we mess it up anyway. That's a good observation. But that's the Bible story, isn't it? Yes, sir, Sam? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good observation as well. If you couldn't hear Sam, God didn't give up on His people in spite of all these failures, in spite of how often they turned away, in spite of their own selfishness. A good example for us. And again, some people, when they look at the Old Testament, all they see is Sodom and Gomorrah. They don't see that God, throughout all of the times, even when He does judge, is a God of great mercy and a God of compassion, especially to people who are making an effort. You know, one thing you could say about these guys, especially Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is they don't give up on God either. They kind of keep coming back, and that's who God's patient with. people that put their trust in Him. Mark?
I was thinking similar to what Sam said, the example of hope.
Yeah.
People kept screwing up and making
Yeah.
wrong mistakes and thinking for themselves instead of relying on God. Yes, they did keep coming back to Abraham and Isaac and Joseph and Jacob. But the thing is that God was always there and kept them moving them forward and bringing them back.
Yeah.
Therefore, the hope that we have in that is that we all had those same problems in the story.
Yeah. If you couldn't hear Mark, he took everything we basically just talked about and said, what this does is this shows me hope that in spite of myself, in spite of my failings, because God is patient and loving and kind and merciful, I can have some hope in my life because I go through the same struggles that they went through. Trace?
Through the whole book, it reminds me that even though there were bad things that happened to these people, they had frustrations. I mean, Jacob got sold, he got, people couldn't have children that wanted children. God didn't start the world and just walk away and see what was going to happen. He's always there, and you see Him making something out of even the bad things that happen to people.
Yeah. There's a kind of a compromise theory out there in the world, especially as I think as honest people have looked more and more at origins and evolution and creationism and things like that, and there's kind of been a compromise theory. It's been around for a long time. It seems to me that it maybe has regained some popularity. Some people refer to it as theistic evolution, that God created everything like a clock, wound it up, and then just stepped back and let it go. And Tracy's comment was, the one thing you see in Genesis is God didn't do that. He's always there. Man's making his own decisions. He's advancing himself through his own history. But God's got a plan. God works when God needs to work. God's always there. He's watching, and He is active and constant. And so that's a good observation. Good observation. Andrew, did I see you? Yeah. Wait a minute. Who are you going to disagree with here this morning? Let's just get it on the table to begin with. Yeah, I'm sorry. You know I'm kidding with you.
Kind of like theistic evolution, you either believe in it or you don't.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
One of the things I really noticed, probably more this time than any other time, is the family. How God showed us that these people would mature up, become more faithful. They have families. Their families have the same struggles we did. Children that didn't believe, children that did awful things that came back, children that they pretty much stayed faithful, but they still had their faults. To me, it helps if you're dealing with your own children and having difficulties with them that you're going to lose some of them.
Yeah.
But even some of those you might think you've lost, they're going to find God. I mean, some of these people took a whole bunch of years to get faithful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just like today, we're always trying to help God out. That's part of denominationalism. We're trying to help God out. We see this all through Genesis. The man trying to help God with God's plan. We're going to make it better, God.
Yeah.
Just trust us.
Yeah.
And I noticed the family thing probably more this time than anything.
Yeah, it's easy when you study Old Testament history, especially if you don't start in Genesis, or if you just kind of run through Genesis, it's easy to forget that the children of Israel are just a big family. And it's very, very obvious in the early stages. And then what you see it later on is in certain families. When we think of family, maybe think of Hannah and Samuel, or Eli and his sons, or David and his sons, and Samuel and his sons. And you have little glimpses here and there, but you do get some real family pictures in Genesis. Okay? Good observations. Anybody else?
He's patient.
Okay? Patience of God. That's it? Yes, ma'am.
So this isn't kind of the whole book, but I feel like studying this really helps you with some confidence in things. At work, they handed out a new policy, and they People want to be referred to. And my reply is no, I won't. And, well, why? Male and female, he created. That's the answer. You don't, and it helps to go back and look at some of these basic things sometimes.
Yeah.
Should be obvious
Yeah.
to anybody with eyeballs, but apparently aren't.
Yeah. Could you hear Suzanne? She said that it kind of helped me to go back and think through things fundamentally, the basics, because at work they're promoting this use of preferred pronouns, which is all part of the gender confusion thing. Whether I'm a man, if I want you to call me she or her or miss, then that's what you have to do. Or they, yeah. The whole binary thing really messes with my mind. But they used to call that schizophrenia or multiple personality, as far as But I'm not trying to make fun of mental illness. I'm sorry. I'll get crucified for that. Yeah, to go back to the basics and say, let's just remember this is the way we were created. There's the basics are all here, and then that's why it's important. Good observation, Betsy. No. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and it's going to get worse. And I tell you, I was in a meeting in Arkansas, and we were talking about 1 Peter 4 and suffering week before last. We are going to become more and more distinct from the culture around us. And in and of itself, that's not alarming to a lot of people until you consider that what other people are going to start thinking, and what a lot of people already think of Christians, is that we are superstitious, that we can't think for ourselves, that we don't have the mental capacity to reason through things, or we wouldn't conclude what we conclude, that belief in the Bible is archaic, it is nothing more than myth and fairy tale. And you and I are going to get stuck in that pigeonhole, if you're not already stuck in that pigeonhole. We live in a fairly conservative part of the world and a fairly conservative part of the state, but it's coming. And, we're going to have to decide, folks, whether we really believe what Genesis tells us, or whether we think it's just a cultural myth, it's just Jewish form of history, that explains the origin of the Jewish nation, or whether this is really the revelation of God. I never thought I'd have to say that in my lifetime. But because, for all of us that are my age or older or close to it, we were raised in a country that basically believed to some degree in God and creation in some manner or another. But, buddy, that's changing, and it's changing fast, and I don't see that it's going to get better. And let me throw this in there before anybody goes there. It doesn't matter who you put in the White House next. Okay? So don't turn this into some political thing. Politics is not going to change what's happening in our culture. And the sooner we start adhering to our King and finding our hope there, instead of in who we're voting for, then maybe we'll understand that all these things that God says about fighting the fight of faith and defending our faith and wielding the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, maybe these things will become more than just little metaphors for us. Because it's coming, folks. And we're going to have to decide where we stand. And so studying Genesis is significant because this separates us from most of the world out there who consider themselves educated, informed, and good thinkers. Ken?
To me, when I look at stories like Noah and the flood, and what I see a lot of times in Genesis, a repetitive pattern is that God's plan of salvation and how we need to respond to Him. It stands in contrast to today's religious world so much that you see where, if man wrote Genesis, when it came down to say Noah, God would have just chosen Noah and saved him, and it would have, he could have wiped out the world. He could have just snapped his fingers, and everybody but Noah was destroyed, and his family was, him and his family survived. But it wasn't that way. He chose a way for Noah to achieve salvation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not salvation, but I mean to be saved.
Deliverance.
Delivered was better word. From that forthcoming flood and so forth. And so God chooses a way for man, but it's a way of faith.
That's exactly right.
And so to me, that there's so much contrast to what is taught in the religious world today.
Yeah.
Versus, and another example is just like when we were talking about this gender issues and so forth, is that, God would have to apologize, right? If we look at Sodom and Gomorrah,
Mm-hmm.
right? If God changed and now it's okay to
Mm-hmm.
live this way and that way, and it's a choice of lifestyle and this and that, he'd have to apologize to a whole lot of people. I mean, he would be in the wrong.
Yeah.
So it's like you see so much a contrast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, the God of the Bible is fairly absolute in the way He manifests Himself. He is very consistent. I mean, what is it? James says there's no variation, shadow of turning with God. He is not one way in Genesis and another way in Jeremiah and then a different way in Matthew. We perceive Him that way because He may underscore different qualities about Himself. But Ken's point was, you see these things in Genesis, how God asked man to do things. It's faith that saves us, but God expects us to express such as He does with Noah. Noah had to come to deliverance. He didn't. It wasn't just an issue of God thought Noah was okay, so He saved him. It was an arduous journey for Noah, just like it is for everybody else. And that was one of my points that I would make if I was going to tell somebody what Genesis is about. It's about creating trust, because that's what I see in all the patriarchs. Abraham seems to be the one of the three who fundamentally at the outset has some trust in God. I don't know where it comes from. We're never told. He's 75 years old when he leaves Ur, and he left Ur because God told him to. How does he know anything about God that God tells him and he does that? We just don't know. We're not told that. The assumption might be that his family has maintained some semblance of understanding and appreciation of Yahweh, who's not even named then. But for whatever reason, what you see in Abraham is a growing trust in God. You see it to a lesser degree in Isaac. It is huge in Jacob. To me, Jacob is basically the kid that doesn't believe. He's just a self-absorbed young man who's only thinking about himself, and God teaches him to trust. And to me, that is a big lesson in Genesis. And I'm not sure that we always think about Genesis that way, that what you see is, here's what God does for people to elicit trust in them. Okay? So, yes, Ken, those are good observations. And as to the way religion sees things, man's always twisted God's word. I mean, he did it in Israel. There's always been compromise where we try to make God the way we want Him to be, which is all idolatry is. Idolatry is just making gods that we want. And we've always done it. It should come as no surprise that we're doing it in our day and age. But The more you study the Bible, the more you say, "Oh, this is God." Not the way this preacher, or this pastor, or this podcast, or this whatever prompts him to be. This is the way he is. And so we need to be really careful about who we consider authoritative. And that's why we have to go back and study our Bibles. I saw a hand over here a minute ago. Dennis? Yeah.
You study the human eye, and you see all the different parts of the human body. And that's how you come to get to where, okay, there's got to be a creator.
Yeah.
And then if he did that, how great is that?
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know a little about Abraham's early life and how he got where he was. But we just don't. We just don't know. But that's as good a possibility as any. Dorleen? Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 Yeah, if y'all have noticed, if you couldn't hear Dorleen, she's underscoring the patience of God. You can't read Genesis without, how many people already this morning have mentioned patience, hope, forgiveness, kindness, you know. And that's usually, if you ask somebody, characterize the God of the Old Testament. My strong suspicion would be that most people would go, he's pretty stern. And there are times when he is, but mercy, how much did he put up with? Not just in Genesis, but in the characters of the Bible, the nations of the Bible. I mean, they let the Amorites continue 400 years. And they're already sacrificing their children. Even in Genesis, they're pretty immoral people, you can tell. And God gave them another 400 years before he destroyed them. So, yeah, that's one of the qualities of God that maybe we don't underscore as much as we should. And I'll tell you that in our religious environment, the problem with underscoring the patience of God is that, as Ken's pointed out and Andrew's pointed out, religious bodies in our day have taken the concept of God's grace and mercy. Grace being the offer of salvation, mercy being God's verdict on those who are faithful. And they have taken that and run to extremes where there is no justice, there's only grace and mercy. So when we start talking about patience, you know, just like I'm doing now, we almost feel like we've got to qualify it. Because that doesn't mean that God doesn't act in judgment. He does act in judgment. But you are exactly right. He is a very patient, merciful being, and that's an example for us. Emily?
That was a little bit of where I was headed with my comment, is that even though you do see all of those things, it's still balanced out in the fact that God is just.
Yes.
And especially in our day, I mean, I've only been alive for 22 years, and I still am frustrated with the way that society has gone downhill. I can't imagine, having been alive for much longer than that, seeing the way that we as a humankind have deteriorated.
Yeah.
And the frustration that causes, but knowing, you know, sometimes feeling like evil just runs unchecked.
Yeah.
But that he might let it go on and he gives people the opportunity, but when push comes to shove,
Yeah.
evil's punished.
Yeah, I was thinking this week, I'm always trying to think ahead about sermons. And Paul before Felix. And basically Paul's sermon to Felix is boiled down to 3 words. Anybody remember what they are? Paul reasoned with Felix about righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come. And that is the Bible story. Righteousness goes to what God considers to be right, but I would also suggest that it goes to the qualities of God, which include patience. Temperance is self-control. God demands that of us, but God exercises that as well. I mean, if God wasn't a self-controlled being, where would his patience come from? Patience is a direct correlation. There is a direct correlation between patience and self-control. But judgment to come is also part of it. And so you see all of that in Genesis. You certainly do, and I agree. Emily said God has to be pretty frustrated from time to time. Well, God had to be pretty frustrated then too. And yet he had a plan, and he still has a plan. He's still working the plan, and that's the thing to remember. Tracy, you were going to say something?
And he's not one-dimensional. He has a personality, and while you see his patience, he's patient with Jacob. He brings him along. He still expected them to come to a certain point. And when the people didn't come to that point, he sent a flood when he'd had enough. But he was very patient. But he doesn't say, I'm patient because it's okay where you are.
Yeah.
He says, I'm patient because I'm bringing you to some, this is where I want you to come, and I want you to get to your obedience.
Yeah.
I want you to obey me. I want you to come and understand who I am, come to learn to love me, and do what I ask you to do. But if you don't do that, then we see the flood, the story of Noah.
Yeah, and I mean, we all have to have that, folks. You've been a Christian 1 year, 20 years, 40 years, 60 years. It's easy to fall into these patterns to think, well, I'm the exception. I can live the way I want to. God knows my heart. When we are blind to our own lives and our own failings and where we need to go and what's next and what God expects of us in regards to development. Again, and I've been reminded of this 2 or 3 times this week in different ways. Selfishness is an ongoing, lifelong, difficult battle that we all have to face. And if you don't see yourself as selfish, then you are blind to your own failings. Now, it may be to a greater or lesser degree, and maybe you're really good at service and sacrifice in some areas, but not really good in others. But I'm going to tell you, if we don't take seriously Matthew 16, if anybody desires to come after him, let him deny himself, then we're just going to fail. And you see it. Tracy's point was God's bringing these people to faith, but they've got to come to faith. They can't just, God's not one-dimensional where he says, okay, come as you are. That's not what God says. Come to what I want you to be. That's what God says. And you see all of this. You know, these are New Testament principles we're talking about here. Does that strike you as odd? You know, most of the time you talk about these things when you talk about Jesus. But here we are talking about Genesis. And these are the things that we should be seeing. I saw another hand over here. Somebody? Kyle?
I wanted to point out that work out the salvation from fear and trembling and all the stories that we read in Genesis and the results of those that are working it out faithfully and the reward that's ahead of them.
Yeah. Good observation. Good observation. Somebody over here? Yes, ma'am. Steph?
I was just going to say, you know, God created us for a reason. He wanted to have a relationship with us. And he knew from the beginning how man was going to be. He knew the devil was here among us, which is, you know, part of the problem itself. So, I mean, in the end, what did he do for us? So that he could still have that relationship with us. He brought Christ for our salvation.
Yeah.
And it gave us a way to come to him, you know, if we do.
Yes, that's exactly right. If you couldn't hear Steph, the point of God's creation was fellowship, and that's what God's aiming for. In fact, that's the point of really Genesis 2 and 3. The Garden of Eden is all about God having fellowship with man and man losing it, and then starts the rest of the Bible. God, here's what I'm going to do to restore that, but it's on God's terms. This is the issue with us. It's got to be on God's terms, not on our terms, because of God's nature. God's perfectly holy, perfectly just, pure. I mean, you don't mix up muddy clothes and clean clothes, and we can't unmuddy ourselves. Only on God's terms can we have fellowship. Only if we can get clean again. And so the rest of the Bible is about that. So here is the beginnings of all of this. Here's the problem. And here's the way. And you see the way illustrated in Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the faith that they had and God's acceptance of them. Even as imperfect people, this is one of the things, and we talked about hope a while ago. One of the things that gives me great confidence is that, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they messed up a lot. Look at Lot. I mean, 2 Peter chapter 2 calls Lot a righteous man. And I look at that and go, really? How do you get that out of the Genesis story? And yet that's God's verdict. He's a righteous man in the eyes of God. I don't know what all was going on with Lot, but he made some really bad decisions. And what does that do? Well, that gives me some hope because I make some bad decisions. But I'm going to keep trying to trust and do what God tells me to do instead of just do what I want to do. And that's the basis upon which God offers salvation. Not because I think the water of baptism is miraculous, but because God said, hey, do this. This is what I want you to do. Well, I trust Him. I mean, trust and faith is not a hard concept. It's the doing that's the hard part. Anybody else? Yes, sir, Sam? Yeah. 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 Yeah, you get a picture of God in Genesis, but boy, you get the picture of man in Genesis too. Okay, whether it's the flood and the wickedness, or whether it's the Tower of Babel and rebellion again, or whether it's rebellion in the lives of these individuals. Yes, this is who we are, folks. Think of yourself all you want to. You can be impressed with yourself all you want to, but this is who you are. And the only way that's going to change is by selfless sacrifice to God. Yes, ma'am.
I hadn't thought about the picture of man, but it just struck me when you said that. I thought, and they didn't go from righteous to building the tower in a week.
Yeah.
They had to take one step and then another, and it just keep going a little bit farther. And it seems like you have a generation and you try to teach them what's right, and all it takes is one little step. Each generation seems to move just a little further and a little further and a little further until
the dominoes fall, whether individually in our life or generationally. And we need to think about those things when we make decisions in our lives. We need to think about those things as we're raising our children. We need to think about those things in our relationships in a local church. All these things are very practical. And you'd think, well, you got all that out of Genesis? Yeah, because that's all in Genesis. And so, okay, well, I hope the class has been profitable to you. I appreciate all your comments this morning. Next Sunday, Phil Robertson will be here, but then actually a week from Wednesday, we'll start the new classes. Acts will be meeting in here. Job will meet in the back. I still think there's 10 slots or so left if you want to go in the Job class. But please sign up for one or the other so we can get material done. Thanks so much.